Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. My name is Kobe Cornell Boone. If this is your first time clicking on the video, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for clicking this video. I pray that you find this valuable. I am managing director and founder of Boone Capital. We are a Reg D 506C private equity firm in real assets. So, all things land, infrastructure, real estate, timber, all the above that pertains to the wonderful world of the outdoors, man. So this is the second part of this series where I'm going to focus a little bit more on the land piece on this particular video. And as the topic states, why this land wins. Um, I have been blessed to have a growing portfolio along with me and my wife in the land space. And I can tell you that every acre is not valued the same. I can tell you that every piece of property is not valued the same. You can have 1,000 acre tract along a road, public county maintained or a public highway that is valued less than 100 acre tract on the same road. See it all the time, see it every day. And you do too. And I think after today's video, a great way to tie this together would be to say you'll be able to identify exactly why that is. So let's jump into it. Most investors look at acreage for how many acres can I get? What is my cost basis per acre? How much road frontage do I have? What does my timber look like? How many ponds, water, hunting potential, if you will, recreational value of that property? And those are all reasonable questions to ask, and some of the same questions that I ask as well, right? However, those today are increasingly rather not your most important questions as a private landowner, because two properties, as I mentioned again, can be valued totally different based on a few different factors, and one becomes incredibly valuable with time and appreciation, whereas the other kind of stays the same, and that's because of infrastructure. So I've become increasingly convinced that some of the most valuable land opportunities over the next decade won't be determined by acreage alone. They're going to be determined by access, but it's going to be access not in the traditional sense of can you get to your property, can you walk your property, if you will. It's going to be access to power. It's going to be access to water. It's going to be access to fiber optic, access to transportation, and access to economic activity within that particular area. And in today's video, what I want to do is walk through why infrastructure may be one of the biggest drivers of land value in America today. So let's start with why professionals buy access, if you will. Whew, bless me, guys. Sorry about that. One of the biggest mindset shifts I've had evaluating properties is realizing that professionals don't just buy land, man. Like they're buying options, they buy possibilities, they buy future use cases, they buy access. Most people see that as just a piece of dirt, whereas an infrastructure investor is asking, can I get power? Can I get water? Can I move people? Can I move products? Can I move energy? Can I move data? Because if the answer is yes, the number of potential outcomes exponentially expands. And that's what creates value. Infrastructure creates optionality. And optionality creates upside. It creates your opportunity. And in the finance world, we say that is where you find alpha, is in those opportunities. Now, why transmission lines matter. So let's start with the power component. Everybody's talking about AI. Obviously, everybody's talking about data centers. A lot of folks are having conversations around economic growth around data centers and what those opportunities will actually bring. But again, not as many people are talking about transmission. And transmission lines are some of the most important assets in the modern economy because they connect generation to actual demand. They move your electricity across different regions. They often take years to permit and build. When I see major transmission infrastructure near a property myself, I pay attention. Not just from a recreational standpoint. Historically, people know about power line easements, if you will, as travel corridors for wildlife, but because I know growth is on the way from a population standpoint. And it's not because the transmission itself creates the value, but because the future development follows that infrastructure that's in place for that demand. The ability to access electricity is becoming increasingly important, especially as power demand continues to rise, right? And that's why transmission corridors they matter, and your substations, if you will, which is another component that I think is a focus on enough. And the next piece that we kind of want to unpack is why they matter as much. So most people drive by substations every day and they never think of them. They just say, "Oh, that's where the power is," or "That's where the power lines connect to." But developers think about them constantly. Utilities think about them constantly. Infrastructure investors think about them as well, and is primarily due to capacity. It's due to potential. Substations represent connectivity, if you will. They represent the ability to distribute power where it's actually needed. And demand for electricity grows. Assets that sit near infrastructure in those cases become increasingly interesting. And you don't need to be an engineer per se to understand this. If you take, for example, a piece of property that's out in the middle of nowhere, it could be an hour, 2 hours away from, a metropolitan area versus a property that is right on the edge of the suburbs, if you will, and they already have some of that existing infrastructure. There's going to be a higher demand for that growth corridor that's developing where the existing infrastructure lies. So you just need to simply recognize from that standpoint that where power availability matters, and who it matters to is important as well. And substations are a critical piece of that puzzle. Now, component that you'll see as well that increasingly comes up, especially when we're talking about Texas and water and the growth of the Texas Triangle, if you will, which is that region between Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and Houston, if you will, is water. Water, water, water. I'm screaming it from the rooftops, water. I think water may become one of the most important real asset themes of the next decade, bar none. Cities need it, industry needs it, agriculture needs it, manufacturing, data centers need a lot of it, population growth as well, economic growth. It is the lifeblood, if you will, I think of us as a species. And unlike many resources, water isn't something that you can easily create. That's why water infrastructure matters. And that $20 billion fund actually got stood up by Governor Greg Abbott here back in 2025, and the folks who voted on that, and both sides of the coin, were able to come together and say, "Hey, we see the need here." That's why reservoirs matter, and why reliable access matters too. Because it's one thing to say, "Okay, we need more water," but being able to access that water and actually put it to use is a different ballgame. So while evaluating land, if you will, I'm increasingly asking the question of what is the water story with this property too, because that's often the hidden asset that I think oftentimes people overlook, especially folks that might be coming from the development world versus your agriculture world, if you will. Let's talk fiber, highways, and utility access. This is huge. So let's talk about connectivity. So when I say connectivity, I'm talking about your fiber optic. I'm talking fiber, roads, highways, utility corridors, things that may not be as exciting, but they're incredibly valuable. And I'll tell you why. Infrastructure reduces friction. The easier it is to connect, take an example, the easier it is to connect a property to economic activity, if you will. Hopefully, I don't know if you guys can see that. Hopefully, you can see this. The easier it is to connect a property to economic activity, the more valuable that property becomes, and the easier it is to move people, products, whatever your business is, data, energy, the more possibilities exist. That's why growth tends to follow the infrastructure. Let's put that in the middle. That's why, let's change the color. Let's put red in the middle. That's why growth tends to follow the infrastructure, because economic corridors often become development corridors, and infrastructure creates then the momentum that is required, and that momentum creates the value. That is your alpha. That's where your upside resides, right? So right now, we're currently underwriting a property. We have a 356-acre assemblage. It was a former sand and rock quarry mine in Dallas County that we're actually underwriting at this time. And actually the same conversations we're having in regards to this today are the same conversations I'm having with folks on Texas DOT, and all kinds of individuals that are involved here, because it wasn't just the lakes, one of which we estimate, we're going to find out during our due diligence process, but one of the lakes we estimate to be 200 feet at depth, and that's one of four. So we're talking about billions of gallons of water in this case. And it's not simply the lakes, if you will. It's not simply the location. It's the infrastructure. It's the road access. We got a county maintained road right there. It's the utility proximity. We got access to power. We got water features there. We've got, millions in dirt work that have been done to this particular property for its prior use. It's 20 minutes from downtown Dallas. Access to a major metropolitan area surrounded by 8 different parks. So the more that I studied and I looked into this thing, and I realized the value wasn't per se just the acreage and the dirt itself. The value was in the optionality, and I actually found out that there was 2 other offers on this property as well. Those, I would imagine that these folks are seeing the alpha again in that optionality, if you will, not just per se the acreage. So the question then becomes, how many future outcomes could exist? How many potential users might find this property of value? How many different paths could create the appreciation that we're looking for in the property? And then I'll even take it a step further for you. The initial tax advantages from a K that could be passed through to a K1 from an investor standpoint, for what can we depreciate that's already been improved on this piece of property as well. That's a huge one for potential LPs and what they're looking at when we do cost segregation studies. So that's how infrastructure investors think. They aren't just evaluating that property is today. They're evaluating what it would be tomorrow, when you factor in that connectivity, if you will, when you factor in that development corridor and what's possible. So let's talk about, I'll use these again later. Let's talk about raw land versus strategic land. So the biggest takeaway from this video, I think, today is very simple. Raw land isn't necessarily valuable. Take that with a grain of salt. Just give me a second. Raw land in and of itself isn't necessarily valuable. It's valuable in the eyes of the beholder. Whatever that person that's looking at that piece of property's usages for is valuable to them. But raw is just that. It's raw. Strategic land is strategically positioned, strategically improved land is increasingly becoming more and more valuable. The market oftentimes will focus on acreage. You'll see that all the time. Acreage, acreage, acreage. But the smartest investors, again, focus on access to the things we talked about today. Access to power, access to water, fiber optic, access to roads, access to utilities, because infrastructure creates optionality, and optionality creates value. As I continue studying, I think energy, land, data centers, infrastructure, real assets, this is the one lesson that keeps showing up over and over again. The future belongs to assets connected to critical infrastructure. So again, just taking a step back, this is part 2 of this series that I'm doing this week. I'm going to be sharing kind of like a drip factor this week, these videos in bite-sized pieces for everyone. And this one in particular, I wanted to double down on kind of the infrastructure bottleneck economy, if you will, of what we're seeing and how it impacts land and where land fits into that stack. In part three, so the next video we're going to break down is 5 things that every data center developer needs before they can even begin building. So if you like this video, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, share this with somebody that you know, leave a comment, man. What's the most important piece of infrastructure that you look for when evaluating land for whatever uses that you're interested in, whether that's water, road access, whatever the case may be. But again, my name is Kobe Cordell Boone. I hope you found this valuable today. Until next time, God bless.